want to thank everybody for being here today, and we're just going to talk about retention recruitment. I think it's a big issue. It's something that we need to address, and consistently, when you look at so many of our that's okay. Consistently, when you look at so many of our issues that we're dealing with within the community, so many times it comes down to lack of resources, being able to get to something quickly. When we're able to put resources on a problem, generally we get quick results. Case in point, homicide. We've increased homicide from several years ago, from when I started, 5 detectives to 16, and we've seen our homicide clearance rate just continue to climb. I'd like to start by saying that we have been open and honest about the challenges we face with recruiting, and the fact that we haven't been able to recruit as many people. There's a variety of reasons for this. I think nationwide, law enforcement isn't the fanciest of careers right now. There's been a lot of pressure on departments. There's been a lot of officers who have been prosecuted for various issues. And you know, in 2020 we had a lot of protests against law enforcement in general, even here in Albuquerque, although nothing had happened. Since Mayor Keller came into office, we've met our goal of hiring 100 officers, which was our goal, but we can't keep up with retirements. And you know, one of the things I'm going to talk about is kind of like separations. In 2019, we had 45 people leave the department. This consisted of 21 retirements and 21 resignations, 3 terminations. In 2020, as we talked about, as nationally, we saw a lot of pressure on the profession, a lot of scrutiny on the profession. We saw an increase to 83 separations, including 46 retirements, which about doubled, and 6 more resignations. But there was a lot of accountability, and we were beginning to hold individuals accountability. We actually had 10 terminations. In 2021, our numbers really increased, and there was a variety of things happening at the Albuquerque Police Department. As you know, our consent decree was very focused on officer accountability. You know, in the city of Albuquerque, we pushed back a little bit, and we knew there had to be a balance, but we did have to follow the policy that was in place at the time in order for us to gain the compliance that we've gained in the recent past. And in doing so, a lot of officers faced discipline. We still had the scrutiny nationwide. We once again doubled our retirements. We got to take into account and consider the fact that in 2017 we had hired a lot of lateral officers who had now gotten their high 3 years based off of the raise that they had gotten, and that's how our retirement is based. And we anticipated there would be a large amount of retirements. I think the shocking thing that came to us is from 2019 to 2021, we basically almost tripled the number of resignations. And 2021 was a tough year on accountability for the Albuquerque Police Department. Like I stated earlier, there was a lot of national spotlight on law enforcement in terms of accountability. Our settlement agreement, we knew the disciplinary process needed to be changed, but we had to follow what was in place in order for us to meet compliance, and there was a lot of discipline handed out, and we had a lot of people leave the profession. I'm glad to say that in 2022, we did have the change of policy. We have made improvements in compliance with our settlement agreement, and we're starting to see the numbers to reduce. And so far in 2022, 9 of the 12 months that have passed, we've slowed the retirements down to 44 as opposed to 97 last year. The resignations still are on pace to meet last year's. We're at 45 as compared to 58, slowing down slightly, but still the same for the most part. And our terminations are down, 8 last year to 5. As we pulled the national headlines from CNN and the Washington Post, you can clearly see that nationwide there is a shortage of law enforcement officers. And as an incentive to keep our officers with the department that are eligible to retire, a lot of them could leave at year 19 at 70% of their retirement. But I am one of those officers who came back in 2017 to increase the percentage from 70 to 90 and to get a better retirement. We're trying to keep officers from even leaving, and we're offering incentive for individuals who have 19 years of para-service credit. And the incentive that we're offering these officers is they will get a check on every last day of the month, $1,500 before taxes. This translates into about $18,000 a year. We have members here with our recruiting team that said it made a difference for them, and they've decided to stay on the department past the 20 years because they see the financial benefit. Not only that, we're going to be paying 100% medical costs for any officer 19 years and above. And you know, just last month was one of our lowest months. As we started talking about this incentive going in, last month was one of our lowest months for retirement. So it seemed to make a difference the first months, and at the end of the year, we'll be gauging, we'll be releasing to the community whether you know, we saw a reduction. But you have the numbers now, and at the end of the year, we'll see if the number of retirements went down. Currently, we have 857 sworn personnel, which you can imagine is not where we want to be, but we make things work. And I think that it's important that we look at our ability to provide service as a whole and not just look at sworn law enforcement numbers. We have 40 police service aides and 73 911 operators and 29 dispatchers. But what we also have done is we have 514 people on our professional staff that we couldn't do our job without. And these are the civilians that are helping the police department. And you look at this, they're a support for officers. They're enabling us to clear officers to go back into service and do a lot of work. And this is something that we actually started in 2018 when I returned to the Albuquerque Police Department. The first step towards getting civilians to help sworn do their job was our SHIELD unit. And you know, in 2018 and 19, LFC report came up that these civilians actually assisted the Albuquerque Police Department in doubling our indictment rate of cases going to the courts. So we saw big success of that last year when we, in 2020 at the beginning of 2021, when we worked out the stipulated agreement with DOJ on the number of investigators that we'd have doing investigations on use of force. We wrote in that and we talked about, and we determined that we were going to have 25 investigators, but we also recognized that we were going to bring civilians on to do that job. And many times there are the horror stories of the past where there were so many people assigned to the compliance unit. Deputy Chief Lowe is here, and I think it's 4 people sworn.
Without the specialized projects.
Yes, without the specialized project, there's now only 4 sworn individuals assigned to compliance. So those are some huge steps for us to clear up officers to do what they need to do and assist in other places. Investigations, everybody in the media has gone over a search warrant or arrest warrant from the past and seen what DIT is doing. And this is just how the city is looking. We're thinking outside the box, and we're expanding our ability to provide service outside of a law enforcement officer. So we've hired many civilians to help us in a lot of areas, and we're filling civilian staff, and we will continue to bring in civilian staff to help us. We currently have 41 retired officers that have come back under para, and we have at least 50 that are working in the department under contracts with temp services. So we know that officers have a value beyond their 20 years. They want to work, and we're trying to find ways to incentivize it, and that's where so much of our incentive is coming from. We also know that we're finding ways to clear up calls for service. The Community Safety Department has taken 9,425 calls for service. You know, in a lot of ways, a lot of officers take a couple hundred calls for service a month. If you look at that, that's starting to add up a lot of officer hours that are cleared up with some of these calls that didn't require a law enforcement officer. One of the benefits to that is the reduced potential for uses of force. We were in federal court earlier this week, and we spoke to the courts about uses of force. And one of the things that was pointed out by the opposite side, the federal side and the monitor side, is that we have seen a reduction in use of force at the Albuquerque Police Department. And I believe so much of that's attributed to we're getting the right resources out there at the right time, and the Community Safety Department is one of those. Uh, there are other things that are helping our recruiting. We have seen an increase in recruiting since we announced that we are gaining more compliance with the DOJ process. You know, departments under a consent decree are not easy places to work for. I personally try to recruit laterals from surrounding agencies on a consistent basis, and the number one thing that deters them is the fear of our settlement agreement. And we have been working to reduce those fears. In the past, they were real. Officers getting disciplined. We changed the policy, we changed the process, and now we've seen a reduction in the discipline that's being handed out by officers. But there are other things that just were frustrating towards officers. I want to compliment the Justice Department, the monitoring team, for working with us. But some of those horror stories that were coming from officers to other places was, you know, and I've said it before, the 5 hours to investigate when you forcefully handcuff somebody and the amount of video that review went into it. We've come to preliminary agreements where we're going to reduce this number, and we're working forward to being able to get our officers more into service. And it helps us with that, but it also helps us with recruiting laterals who we start to help overcome that fear of the settlement agreement. As we remain committed to reform, I have strived to find the most sustainable way to move forward and fight crime at the same time. And that's where we want to be thankful to everybody involved in the settlement process, is that we are starting to really find those ways. And it is making a difference when you look at the amount of compliance that we've gained. A lot of it is attributed to working on sustainable solutions that will benefit both the department and the community. Recently announced the department is self-monitoring in a nearly quarter of the CASA requirements, and we're hoping to have another group of those in self-monitoring in the near future. We talked about OBRD and the reduction of video, and with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to turn it over to anybody else who has any questions that we have, and we have some staff here that is able to provide updates. Is there anybody specific who need to come up? No, and like I said, we're here for questions, and we have the experts here.
So you're talking about this new bonus plan, retention plan, $18,000 per officer?
Per officer that has 19 years of para-service credit.
That. So altogether, you're talking about, I imagine, many hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yes.
And has that money already been allocated, or are you hoping it will be allocated?
No, we have salary savings from that we're able to utilize. We've also received funding from the governor, who was very generous in funding officer positions for us, so we'll be able to reallocate money. So there's a lot of different ways that we've come up, and budgetarily we've worked the numbers, and we feel confident that we have the budget. And if if we ran into any snags, I'm not above going to council and asking for additional funds to ensure that we're able to keep our officers. And I think everybody sees the necessity. I think locally, City Council has been very supportive in us having the proper amount of officers and keeping officers here. The mayor's been great over the years, announcing that he wants to grow the numbers. And you know, the state legislature actually has groups that are working on how we're going to retain officers statewide. So this is a statewide problem. It's recognized statewide, and I think we have good support to ensure that we'll have the funding to continue this until this shortage is overcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you mentioned last month was the lowest month of retirement. Do you have a number on that?
I think the last number I had was one, Roger, can you, or three?
There was only one.
One retirement last month. And when you look that we've already had this year 44 retirements, it is definitely an outlier compared to other months.
I have a question as well. You mentioned for officers 19 plus years, you're going to be covering 100% of their medical costs. I wonder for officers in general, what mental health services may be more available, if any, to help that retainment of officers to last past 19 years?
You know, that is a great point, and that is something that we see in resignations. Is like there are a lot of individuals who are struggling in those mid-levels. We have a great DOJ approved process for officers' mental health and the resources that we provide them, and we are looking at new ways also. Matter of fact, one of the things we're considering is when an officer decides to resign instead of retire, we've been open to bringing them back before 90 days, and we're looking to increase that number. And we've had a number that once they get a break, they want to return to the job. So we do have a great peer support. We do have good services for those officers who may be struggling with their own mental health. And Corey, do you want to add anything on to that?
Sure. Good afternoon, or good morning. I'm Corey Lowe. I'm the Deputy Chief over the Accountability Bureau. A big part of that is the inclusion of behavioral health. So we have not only behavioral health for our officers, but also for their families. So we have a very strong and robust program that has been in place and in compliance for well over 5 years. So the amount of peer support that we have available is very large. We have one of the largest in the nation, and we've been training nationwide in order to bring the best that we can provide to our officers and their family.
You know, and I think it's important to also note that that mental health aspect is important, and it has to be something that's viewed as important from the very top. I've been very open to our officers to the fact that every 6 months I sit down with somebody for my mental health. And I think we got to make sure we take the stigmatism of mental health away and make sure that everybody knows that it's proper and it's a good thing to talk to somebody and get help. And matter of fact, we mandated last year that all of our command level officers that are outside of the collective bargaining agreement go through a once a year check. And we're also working that every single officer in the department go through a check once a year. So we're working out some financial parts and getting the resources to be able to do it. But I think it's a big part. That was a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. You know, the other thing I wanted to talk about was, you know, I know when the mayor took office, we talked about our goal is 1,200 officers. We would love to get to 1,200 officers. But I'm here today to say that it's going to be very difficult. We were going to do our very best to get to 1,200 officers, and that is our goal. But the reality of it is, in this environment, we may not. And we're going to take ownership if we don't. But we're not just going to talk about we can't do this. We're talking about how we're going to get the job done still. And I think that's where it's so important that we talk about the professional civilian staff that we're bringing in and how we're finding to improve processes and make the job easier for our officers, so that hopefully someday maybe we could do it with even less officers than the 1,200. Any other questions? Yes.
Chief Medina, do we have an update on recruits? Are we seeing more recruits coming in?
You know what? I'm glad you asked that question. APD Cadet Class 126 had 26. That announcement was made that we were suspending those paragraphs. We made some changes in our selection process. We looked at the amount of time that somebody could use marijuana. And I think we could still work on some time frames. We looked at the testing that was being provided and where we were giving more tests than necessary in certain areas. We had some people who were failing math test portions of a test that were being eliminated from the process, and it really had no direct job relations, so we've modified that. And between all those things together, like I said, I can't say that just the DOJ part alone does it or the testing part. It's a combination of everything and looking at it as a whole, and we're anticipating that we're going to have 50 to 60 cadets in our next December class, and we put 17 early in the process into C&M. So if we wouldn't have those 17 at C&M, there's a possibility we could have had a class in the fall of 77 officers, and that would have been the biggest class in probably the last 30 years, ever, historically. So we are seeing some good positive trends. You know, unfortunately, as the economy, struggles, people are going to be looking for a good career, and we're trying to do everything we can to recruit individuals. But, Jacob, do you want to talk a little bit about what you guys are seeing recruiting-wise and some of the struggles you see where people have now that we're trying to help them get through it?
I'm Sergeant Hoisington. I'm a supervisor over the backgrounds unit. And as the chief mentioned, we have looked at our own processes within the background selection process to increase applicant flow, at least give individuals the opportunity to make it into the backgrounds. And one of those was looking at the testings that we use, which was the city entrance. So we haven't reduced standards at all. We have all of our mandated, and if you look at our qualifications across the board, we are the highest or have close to the highest standards across the state when you compare us to BCSO, Rio Rancho, Santa Fe PD. Despite those factors, our recruitment levels are still high. We are seeing applicants applying, but we want to make sure that we're getting them through that initial testing so we can actually see them in backgrounds and evaluate them at that process. And when I did the numbers for this in the last 6 months, we started this process in April of 2022. So about the last 6 months, the percentage of fail rate has dropped to about 15%, whereas prior to that it was at 47. So we are seeing that pay dividends for applicants making it into the background stage. So at least to give them that opportunity moving on to the next step. We've also looked at other opportunities to allow applicants to be more readily available. So we're in the final stages of getting approval for a pre-hire assignment. So we can actually hire applicants that are qualified, look good, have done certain parameters that we've narrowed down as far as polygraph, criminal history checks, and we can offer them employment within 2 weeks of testing. And then we have access to them to get them to their appointments, into polygraph after they complete it, medical and stuff like that, so we have the ability. But,
You know, and I think it's important to note that, you know, like, this is where we had to do things different as a police department. So many times we relied on these initial tests and they were going to eliminate an individual from the process of becoming a police officer. One test. And we recognized that, you know, maybe the academy process and somebody going through the training would be a better indicator if somebody's able to do the job or not. So I know that, you know, there'll always be critics who say, oh, you eliminated portions of the testing coming in. No, we're actually looking at with our eyes wide open, and we're not saying one test is going to determine that somebody should be an officer or not. Yes, sir.
Follow-up question. As far as this plan goes, was this something that people on the force came and said, if this was implemented, we'd be more than likely to stay? How did this plan sort of come up?
This retention plan was actually a big conversation between myself and the APOA president, Sean Willoughby. We had conversations, we met, we talked about how we could do something for some of our officers to keep them on longer, and we actually signed an MOU with the union over this. And we had their support, and he himself has commented back to me that this is a game changer for us.
Chief, you mentioned that there's 50 plus officers that are still on contract with APD. Are they actively working for the department, or can they come back at any time?
No, I mean, we have limitations. I hope the state legislature is listening and help us with some of those limitations on para. What they do is they come back and they help us in supporting roles. And one of the best roles that I could think about is, if one thing that the Department of Justice has always complimented about, it's our reality-based training. And this is where our officers go through live scenarios with actors, and they go through a use of force, and they're presented different ideas. And a lot of these retired officers are hired on contract to help us with that reality-based training. So for us, we're able to not have to use officers in that fashion, but at the same time, we're helping us advance in our training and getting officers more quality training.
Any more questions?
Any more questions? We're out there.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.